John Miller had always been a man of routine. He woke with the sun, fed the cattle, checked fences, and repaired anything that broke on his ranch in the wide, lonely plains of Montana. The land was beautiful, in a quiet, rugged way. But it could also be brutally lonely. Since his wife passed away years ago, John's days had become a pattern of work and silence. He rarely saw anyone outside of town, and even fewer people visited his remote property. Most nights, he sat by the fireplace with a mug of coffee, staring at the flickering flames and thinking about what could have been. Life felt heavy, and sometimes he wondered if he would ever feel connected to another human being again. One evening, as the sky turned shades of pink and orange, John was repairing a broken fence along the northern edge of his property. The wind whipped across the plains, cold and sharp, tugging at his coat. He tightened the last loose nail when he noticed something unusual. A shadow moved along the horizon, too tall and deliberate to be a tree or a fence post. Squinting, he saw a figure walking steadily toward him. It was a woman. She was striking in a way that immediately drew John's attention. She was tall, much taller than any woman he had ever seen. Her hair shone like dark silk in the fading light, and she moved with a confidence that seemed almost otherworldly. Her dress flowed behind her as she walked, catching the wind like a sail. At first, John felt a flash of fear. He was used to being alone, and sudden strangers in the middle of the plains were not common or always safe. But something in her presence made him pause. A strange mix of curiosity and calm. "Hello," she said softly, her voice clear over the wind. "My name is Eleanor." John wiped his hands on his jeans and straightened, unsure how to respond. "Hello," he said cautiously. "Can I help you with something?" Eleanor smiled, a gentle, almost shy smile. I just wanted to meet you," she said. Her eyes, a deep shade of green, seemed to look right through him, as if she could see the loneliness that had weighed on him for years. "I've been watching you from afar." John blinked. "Watching me?" he asked, his heart beginning to race. He wasn't sure if he was afraid or intrigued. "Why?" "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, her voice soft. "Maybe because you seem different. Kind, honest, strong, but lonely. I thought maybe we could keep each other company." John opened his mouth to reply, but the words caught in his throat. He had not spoken to anyone like this in years. The way she looked at him, calm but expectant, made his chest tighten. "You want to stay here?" he finally asked. Eleanor nodded. "If you'll let me," she said. "I can help with the work, or just be here with you. I know you've been alone." John looked at her, unsure if he was dreaming or if she was real. He had never imagined a woman would just appear at his ranch, tall and kind, and offer herself so simply. He had spent years building walls around his life, walls of silence and routine, and suddenly someone had stepped through them. "You really want to stay?" he asked again, more softly this time. "Yes," Eleanor replied. I think we could help each other." There was something in the way she said it, something honest and sincere. John found himself nodding slowly. "All right," he said. "Finally. You can stay. But I have to warn you. Life here isn't easy. It's just work and quiet." "I like quiet," Eleanor said with a small smile. "And work. I can do work." Over the next few days, John showed Eleanor around the ranch. She learned quickly how to feed the cattle, mend fences, and even handle the stubborn old horse that no one in town could manage. She worked with a calm patience that amazed John. When he tried to lift heavy wood or move supplies, she often helped without a word, her long arms making the work look effortless. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of relief, not just because the work was easier, but because he no longer felt completely alone. At night, They would sit by the fireplace. Eleanor would ask him about his past, his childhood, and the life he had built on the ranch. He was hesitant at first, but slowly, he began to open up. He told her about his wife, about the dreams he had when he was young, and the regrets he carried with him. Eleanor listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. It was a type of companionship John had forgotten existed. Then came the night she said the words that shocked him. They had finished dinner, and the fire was crackling warmly in the hearth. Eleanor turned to him, her face lit softly by the flames, and said in a voice that was almost a whisper, "I'll give you my body, every night." John froze. His heart pounded in his chest. For a moment, he didn't move or speak. The words were strange and startling, but somehow, they didn't feel threatening. There was a vulnerability in her tone, a quiet honesty that made him realize she was not speaking lightly or carelessly. I don't understand," he said finally, his voice low. Eleanor reached out and took his hand gently. "I mean, I want to be with you, to comfort you, to share my presence. Not in a way that's improper, but in a way that brings warmth and closeness. I don't want you to be lonely anymore." John's mind raced. He had been alone for so long that the idea of having someone by his side, someone who truly wanted to be there, was almost overwhelming. Yet, there was also a sense of trust he felt with her, something rare and precious. I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to say anything," Eleanor replied. "Just let me be here. Let me help you carry the loneliness you've been holding." John looked into her eyes, and for the first time in years, he felt a spark of hope. Life had been heavy, silent, and cold, but perhaps, just perhaps, it could become lighter. Perhaps with Eleanor, he could feel warmth again. That night, they sat together in the quiet of the ranch house, listening to the wind whistle across the plains. John didn't sleep much, but he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. A sense that life might still hold surprises, that someone could step into your world and change it completely. Eleanor's presence was comforting, strange, and mesmerizing all at once. And he realized that whatever the future held, he would face it no longer entirely alone. As the weeks passed, their bond grew. John began to anticipate her presence, and Eleanor seemed to flourish in the routines of the ranch. Every day became a little brighter, a little easier, with her by his side. And though the plains were still wide and the nights still long, the house no longer felt empty. It was filled with quiet conversations, shared meals, and a connection that was simple, real, and profoundly human. John often caught himself smiling when he saw her working beside him. He felt a strange, new kind of joy, one that had nothing to do with the ranch, the cattle, or even the land he loved. It was a joy born from the realization that someone cared enough to step into his life, not for what he could give, but simply to share it. And for Eleanor, the ranch offered a sense of home she had never known. She had wandered for years, seeking a place where she could belong. With John, she found not just shelter, but acceptance. And every night, when she whispered her promise to bring warmth to his lonely nights, it wasn't just words. It was the beginning of a life neither of them had expected, but both desperately needed. Days turned into weeks, and John Miller began to notice changes he hadn't expected. Life on the ranch, once predictable and lonely, now felt alive in a way he hadn't imagined possible. Eleanor moved with quiet confidence, making the large house feel smaller, warmer, and more lived in. She woke early, helped with the cattle, repaired broken fences without complaint, and even tended to the small vegetable garden John had long neglected. Her presence was like a gentle tide, steady and reassuring, washing away the years of isolation that had weighed so heavily on him. John found himself talking more. He would tell Eleanor stories about his childhood, about how he had learned to ride horses before he could even walk properly, About the summers he had spent exploring the hills and streams around the ranch with his parents, and about the dreams he had once held of traveling beyond Montana. Eleanor listened with rapt attention, sometimes asking simple questions that revealed her curiosity and intelligence. She didn't interrupt. She didn't judge. She simply listened. And that, John realized, was a gift he hadn't received in years. At first, he had been wary. Her height and striking appearance had startled him, and her sudden arrival had seemed almost impossible. But over time, he came to appreciate her uniqueness. Eleanor had a way of moving through the world that was both graceful and practical. She could carry heavy bundles of hay without strain, coax a frightened calf into following her, and mend broken fences with a precision John had never seen in anyone else. Even the old horse, stubborn and difficult, seemed to recognize her kindness and responded to her in ways it never did with him. One morning, as the sun rose pink and gold over the plains, John and Eleanor worked side by side in the garden. She dug furrows for new seeds while he cleared weeds and repaired the fence around the patch. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of soil and the faint aroma of wildflowers growing along the edges of the property. Eleanor paused for a moment, brushing dirt from her hands, and looked at John with a small, warm smile. "You've done a good job here," she said. "This garden looks alive again." John nodded, feeling a swell of pride. "It hasn't been this good in years," he admitted. I didn't think it would ever feel like a real home again." Eleanor's eyes softened. "Homes aren't just made of walls or fences," she said quietly. "They're made of the people who live in them, and the care they give to it." John felt a lump in his throat. Her words, simple as they were, carried a truth he hadn't realized he missed. He had spent so long alone that he had forgotten the importance of companionship, of shared effort, of someone who cared enough to notice the little things. As the days passed, John and Eleanor settled into a comfortable rhythm. They shared meals, walked the property together, and spent evenings by the fireplace, talking about the past, the present, and sometimes the future. Eleanor asked him about his late wife, and John found that talking about her out loud eased a part of the grief he had carried silently for so long. He told Eleanor about the laughter they had shared, the arguments that seemed important at the time, and the quiet moments of comfort that had made their marriage meaningful. Eleanor listened patiently, never judging, always understanding. One evening, as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared, Eleanor surprised John with a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked along the creek. "For the house," she said softly, "and for you." John accepted them, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through him. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I can't remember the last time someone did something like this for me." "Mind. Sender. See. You deserve it," Eleanor replied simply. "You've worked so hard, and you've been alone for so long. You deserve a little happiness." The trust between them grew with each passing day. John began to realize that Eleanor's presence was not just comforting, it was transformative. He found himself laughing more, sleeping better, and even noticing small joys he had long ignored. The sound of birds singing at dawn, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the satisfaction of a fence finally repaired. Eleanor's energy, patience, and quiet wisdom infused the ranch with life, and John felt a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. Yet, alongside this growing warmth, there was also a subtle, unspoken tension. Eleanor sometimes disappeared for hours without explanation, wandering the property or disappearing into the woods beyond the ranch. When John asked, she would simply smile and say she was taking care of something or enjoying the fresh air. At first, he accepted her answer, but over time, curiosity and unease began to creep in. Why did she sometimes seem so distant? What was she thinking about? When she looked out over the plains, with that faraway expression, one afternoon, John decided to follow her quietly, hoping to understand. Eleanor walked gracefully toward the edge of the forest, her tall frame moving with purpose and ease. John kept a careful distance, staying behind trees and rocks, watching as she reached a small clearing. There, she knelt and seemed to speak softly to the wind or the trees. Her voice was too low for him to hear. But the sight of her there, alone and secretive, stirred a mixture of curiosity and worry in John. He stepped forward, and Eleanor turned to him, a faint smile on her lips. "You shouldn't have followed me," she said gently. "Some things are private. Some things are just mine." John felt a pang of guilt. "I'm sorry," he said. I worry about you. You disappear sometimes, and I don't know why. I want to understand." Eleanor stood and walked toward him, her presence calm and reassuring. "I know," she said softly, "but there are parts of me I can't share yet. Parts that I am still figuring out myself. I promise. You are not in danger. You are safe here. With me." John nodded slowly, realizing that Eleanor was still a mystery, and that part of the fascination he felt toward her was that he could not fully understand her. It made her human and real, not a perfect figure from a dream. He accepted that some secrets were hers alone, and that trust was built over time, not forced in a single day. Even with the occasional mystery, their bond continued to deepen. John found himself opening up about dreams he had long abandoned. Traveling to see the mountains far beyond Montana, learning more about sustainable farming, and even attempting to write down some of his memories and stories. Eleanor encouraged him gently, helping him organize his thoughts, and reminding him that life did not have to remain stagnant, even on a lonely ranch. At night, they would sit together by the fire, sharing quiet moments of conversation and reflection. Eleanor never forced closeness, but her presence was comforting. And her earlier promise to bring warmth and companionship was always felt in subtle ways. John realized that intimacy was not just physical. It was emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. It was the comfort of having someone beside you in silence, the reassurance of understanding, and the joy of sharing the simplest tasks together. One particularly cold evening, a snowstorm began to blanket the plains. John worked to secure the animals and close the barn doors against the wind, while Eleanor helped him gather firewood and prepare the house. When the storm raged outside, they huddled together by the fireplace, wrapped in blankets, listening to the wind howl. The ranch, once a place of solitude and emptiness, now felt alive, with warmth, connection, and quiet joy. John realized that Eleanor had changed not only his life, but his perspective. He was no longer just surviving. He was living. He had someone to care for, and who cared for him in return. He had found laughter, companionship, and understanding after years of silence. And he had learned that even in the most isolated places, human connection could bring light to the darkest corners. Eleanor, too, found a sense of belonging she had never known. She had wandered for years, searching for a place where she could truly be herself. With John, she discovered more than safety or shelter. She found acceptance, warmth, and a quiet happiness rooted in shared moments and mutual trust. She no longer felt like a stranger in the world, and every day spent on the ranch strengthened her bond with John and the land he loved. Their lives, once separate and lonely, had intertwined in a way that felt both natural and extraordinary. And though the plains were still wide, the nights still long, and mysteries still lingered, John and Eleanor had discovered the beauty of companionship, the comfort of shared work, and the quiet joy of being understood and valued by another human being. In those weeks, the ranch became more than a home. It became a place of hope, healing, and renewal. And while neither of them could predict what the future held, they knew they would face it together, side by side, with trust, care, and an unspoken understanding that life, no matter how lonely it once had seemed, could always change when someone steps into it with patience, kindness, and honesty. Life on the ranch had settled into a rhythm that was both comforting and productive. John Miller and Eleanor had grown close in ways he had never imagined possible. They shared chores, meals, and long conversations by the fire. Even the animals seemed calmer and more cooperative, as if Eleanor's presence had brought a new harmony to the land. Yet, despite the warmth and trust that had blossomed between them, there remained moments of quiet unease, small hints that Eleanor carried parts of herself that she had yet to reveal. It started with little things. Eleanor would sometimes disappear for hours without explanation. She would say she was collecting firewood or checking the fences, but John began to notice that she often wandered farther than necessary. Sometimes she would return with dirt on her boots, clothes slightly damp, or a contemplative expression as if she had been talking to someone or something that wasn't visible. At first, John brushed it off. He had always been practical and focused on his work, but curiosity and a hint of worry began to grow. One bright morning, John had gone to the barn to feed the horses when he realized Eleanor was not in the house or in the garden. He assumed she was checking the north fence, a task that could take some time. Hours passed, and by noon, John began to feel uneasy. He set down his feed bucket and started walking toward the edge of the property, hoping to spot her. The wind carried sounds of the plains, but Eleanor was nowhere to be seen. Finally, he noticed a path she often took toward the small wooded area at the back of the ranch. The trees cast long shadows under the midday sun, and the forest floor was dotted with fallen leaves and twigs. John followed carefully, staying quiet, trying not to alarm her. After a short distance, he saw her standing in a small clearing. Eleanor was kneeling on the ground, her hands moving gently over something invisible to John at first glance. He stopped, unsure if he should call out or stay hidden. When she sensed his presence, Eleanor turned. There was no anger in her eyes, only a calm and gentle recognition. "John," she said softly, "you shouldn't have followed me. I was worried," John admitted, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. "You disappeared, and I didn't know where you went. I just wanted to be sure you were safe." Eleanor rose slowly, brushing leaves from her clothes. "I appreciate your concern," she said quietly. "But some parts of me, are private, not because I want to hide from you, but because I need time to understand them myself." John nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and curiosity. "I understand," he said, "but I can't help feeling like there's more you're not telling me. Something important." Eleanor looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "There is," she admitted, "but it's not ready to be shared. Not yet. Trust takes time, John. And some truths are fragile." Her words lingered in John's mind long after they returned to the house. He tried to focus on chores, on the animals, and on the garden, but a part of him couldn't stop wondering about Eleanor's secret. Was she hiding something dangerous? Or was it simply a part of her past, too painful to speak aloud? Either way, he realized that while trust had grown between them, understanding had boundaries. He could not force her to reveal everything at once. Days later, the small hints of mystery intensified. John noticed strange footprints near the creek, some of them not matching Eleanor's shoes. He found small items scattered near the barn, twigs arranged in unusual patterns, pebbles placed carefully along the fence line. At first, he thought perhaps the wind or animals had moved them, but something about the deliberate arrangement suggested Eleanor had been there intentionally. When he asked her about it, she smiled gently and said, "Nature has its ways, and sometimes I like to watch it closely." John's mind was both fascinated and unsettled. Eleanor had become his closest companion, someone whose presence had brought joy and meaning back into his life. Yet, she also remained a mystery, like a book he had only begun to read. He realized that part of loving someone, truly appreciating them, was accepting that there were things he might never fully understand. But the unease in him refused to be ignored. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the plains in shades of gold and violet, John decided to address his concerns. They sat together on the porch, wrapped in warm blankets, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. "Eleanor," he began cautiously, "I care about you. I trust you. But I can't help feeling that there's something you're not telling me. I want to understand. I want to be here for you. But I need to know that I'm not in the dark about important things." Eleanor took a deep breath, her fingers lightly brushing his. "John, there are parts of my life I can't share yet. Not because I don't trust you, but because some memories are heavy. They carry pain, regret, or sorrow I am still learning to face." John nodded slowly. "I understand that. I do. I don't want to feel helpless, wondering what you're going through alone." Eleanor's eyes softened, and she leaned slightly closer. "You are not helpless," she said gently. "You are here, and that is enough. Sometimes, just being present, without trying to fix anything, is the greatest support anyone can offer." That night, John reflected on her words. He realized that his desire to know everything was natural, but he also needed to respect her pace. Trust was not just about sharing facts, it was about being patient, present, and understanding. He resolved to let Eleanor reveal her past in her own time, knowing that forcing the issue would only push her away. However, curiosity is a persistent thing, and John's mind could not fully quiet itself. He began to pay closer attention to small details. The way Eleanor sometimes stared into the distance with a thoughtful expression, the way she hummed softly while working alone in the garden, and the way she occasionally paused mid-task, as if listening to something only she could hear. These subtle signs were not frightening, but they were intriguing. Eleanor was not an ordinary companion. She was complex, layered, and, in ways he could not yet understand, extraordinary. One afternoon, a visitor came unexpectedly. A local farmer, curious about the strange rumors surrounding John's property, stopped by. He remarked on Eleanor's height and her unusual confidence in handling the animals. John noticed the way Eleanor handled the encounter. Polite, calm, but slightly distant. After the man left, John asked her about it. "People are curious," Eleanor said softly. "Sometimes curiosity can be gentle, but other times it can feel intrusive. I prefer to keep some things private, not to hide, but to protect." John nodded, realizing that Eleanor's caution was not a sign of deception but a form of self-preservation. Her past had taught her that trust must be earned, and he had begun to understand that patience and respect were as important as companionship. Despite these mysteries, their daily life continued harmoniously. They worked together, shared meals, and enjoyed the quiet beauty of the plains. Yet, in the back of John's mind, the small unease persisted, a quiet reminder that while love and trust could grow, the unknown could never be completely ignored. One evening, a storm approached. Dark clouds rolled across the horizon, and the wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. John worked quickly to secure the animals and the barn, while Eleanor helped without complaint. The storm was fierce, with thunder rumbling across the plains and lightning illuminating the darkened sky. As they worked side by side, John noticed Eleanor pause for a moment, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "What is it?" he asked, concerned. "Nothing," she said, though her voice carried a hint of tension. "Just remembering something. The storm reminds me of places I've been, of things I've seen." John felt a mixture of worry and understanding. Eleanor's past was still partly hidden, and while he trusted her, he also realized that everyone carries memories and experiences that shape who they are. Some of those memories could be difficult to share, even with someone they trusted deeply. When the storm passed, they returned to the house, soaked but unharmed. They sat by the fire, the warmth and light comforting after the cold and chaos outside. John noticed a shift in Eleanor's demeanor. She was quiet, reflective, and slightly distant. Yet, she leaned into him when he offered a blanket, a small gesture that reminded him of the bond they shared. In the weeks that followed, the pattern continued. Eleanor remained a source of comfort, joy, and companionship. But small mysteries and unspoken parts of her life created a subtle tension that John could not fully resolve. He realized that part of loving someone and truly understanding them was accepting that some questions might remain unanswered, at least for a time. By the end of Part 3, John had learned an important lesson. Trust and companionship do not require full knowledge of every detail. Love can grow even in the presence of mystery, and patience and respect are often more powerful than curiosity or insistence. Eleanor had become a vital part of his life, and while shadows of the unknown lingered, he understood that they did not diminish the connection they had forged. The ranch, once quiet and empty, now thrummed with life, warmth, and subtle complexity. John and Eleanor had found something rare, a bond built on trust, patience, and shared experience. And though the unknown still whispered at the edges of their lives, it added depth and intrigue to a connection that had already transformed their lonely, isolated world. The plains were quiet that morning, except for the soft sounds of the wind brushing against the tall grasses and the distant lowing of the cattle. John Miller had learned to wake early, not just to tend to the ranch, but also to anticipate the rhythm of Eleanor's presence. Over the months, she had become more than a companion. She had become part of the ranch itself, almost like the land had found a human counterpart to match its wild, open nature. Yet, as he watched her moving among the cattle, John felt a flicker of concern. Eleanor had been unusually quiet lately, pausing, often as if listening to something he could not hear. Even the animals seemed to sense a subtle change in her energy. John had learned to trust her instincts, but he could not help the feeling that something important was about to be revealed. By mid-morning, Eleanor walked to the edge of the forest, pausing where the trees gave way to the wide-open plains. John followed at a distance, careful not to intrude, but curious about where she was going. Eleanor stopped and looked out over the horizon, the sunlight glinting off her hair. She spoke softly, almost to herself. "John," she said without turning. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight in it. "I think it's time I share something with you. Something I should have shared long ago." John approached slowly, feeling a mix of anticipation and apprehension. He had respected her privacy for months, giving her space when she disappeared and patience when she remained quiet. Now, it seemed, the moment of revelation had arrived. "What is it?" he asked gently. Eleanor turned to him, her eyes meeting his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "My life before coming here, it was complicated. I wandered for many years, trying to find a place where I could belong. I've seen hardship, loss, and sadness that I carried with me. I left places not because I didn't care, but because I needed to protect myself and others from the weight of my own past." John listened, holding her gaze, understanding that this was more than a story. It was a confession, a sharing of the burden she had carried alone for far too long. "I was lonely," Eleanor continued, "much like you. And when I found this ranch, and you, it felt like a chance to start again. I wanted to help you, to bring warmth to your life. And in doing so, I found a place to belong myself. But I kept parts of my past hidden because I wasn't ready to face them, even with someone I trusted." John stepped closer and took her hand. "Eleanor, you don't need to carry that alone anymore. You don't have to hide from me. I want to understand, and I want to be here with you, through everything your past, your present, and your future." Tears glistened in Eleanor's eyes, and for the first time, she allowed herself to release some of the tension she had carried for years. "Thank you, John. I've been afraid that sharing too much would scare you away. But now I see that trust and patience can carry us through even the hardest truths." She told him stories of the places she had lived, the people she had met, and the challenges she had faced. There were tales of solitude in small villages, nights spent under open skies, and moments of fear and uncertainty when she had to rely only on herself. But interwoven with these were stories of kindness she had received, lessons she had learned, and small joys she had discovered along the way. John listened intently, feeling both awe and admiration for the resilience she had shown. As the day passed, Eleanor revealed the most personal part of her story. The reason she had made her unusual promise months ago, the promise to bring warmth and comfort every night. "I knew I could not change the past," she explained, "but I wanted to offer something meaningful. I wanted to remind us both that companionship, trust, and shared presence could bring healing, even if the world had once been cruel." That promise, it was never just about closeness. It was about creating a safe space, a home, and a bond that could endure everything. John felt a profound sense of gratitude and connection. He realized that Eleanor's promise had been as much for her as for him, a way to transform her own loneliness while helping him heal from his. He understood that love, trust, and companionship were not measured by grand gestures alone, but by consistent care, patience, and presence. That evening, the sky was painted in vibrant shades of orange, pink, and purple. John and Eleanor walked along the edge of the plains, side by side, enjoying the calm after a long day of work. The animals were settling in for the night, and the wind carried the faint scent of wildflowers from the hills. For the first time in months, John felt a sense of completeness, a quiet, steady happiness that was not dependent on perfection or certainty, but on shared understanding. "I'm glad you shared everything with me," John said, glancing at Eleanor. "I feel like I know you more now than I ever could before." Eleanor smiled, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "And I'm glad you listened," she replied. "It takes courage to accept someone's story without judgment. You've given me that courage." They returned to the house as darkness settled over the plains. By the fireplace, they shared a quiet meal and then sat in comfortable silence, letting the warmth of the fire fill the room. John realized that Eleanor's presence had become more than companionship. It had become a mirror reflecting his own growth, his own capacity for patience, empathy, and love. Over the following weeks, their lives settled into a new, deeper rhythm. Eleanor no longer felt the need to hide or wander alone. She and John worked together, laughed together, and planned small improvements for the ranch. The garden flourished under their care. The animals thrived, and even the house seemed warmer and more inviting. The mysteries of Eleanor's past no longer created tension. They had become part of the rich tapestry of their shared life. One afternoon, John and Eleanor decided to host a small gathering for neighbors. It was the first time in months that the ranch had seen visitors, and the experience was both awkward and joyful. Eleanor interacted gracefully, answering questions with calm confidence. And John noticed that the subtle tensions and suspicions others had once felt seemed to melt away in her presence. People left with smiles. And John realized that the ranch had become not just a home for them, but a place where warmth and welcome extended to others as well. Through all of this, their nightly ritual, once so mysterious and laden with promise, transformed into a quiet symbol of their trust and companionship. They no longer needed words or gestures to define it. It was simply the knowledge that they were present for one another, ready to face whatever life brought with patience, care, and understanding. One particularly quiet night, as the stars stretched across the sky in a blanket of silver, John reflected on the journey they had taken together. Life had brought him loss, loneliness, and hard work. But it had also brought Eleanor a person who understood him, challenged him, and shared his days and nights in a way that was simple, honest, and deeply fulfilling. "I never imagined my life could feel this full again," he said softly, his voice carrying in the still night. Eleanor squeezed his hand, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "Neither did I," she replied. "But sometimes, the world surprises us in ways we cannot anticipate. Sometimes, companionship, patience, and understanding create a life richer than we could have imagined alone." In that moment, John realized that the ranch, the plains, and the work they shared were important, but more important was the bond they had formed. It was a bond built on trust, respect, patience, and the willingness to embrace mystery without fear. And it was a bond that would endure, no matter what the future held. The days that followed were filled with quiet joy and steady routine. John and Eleanor continued their work, shared their evenings by the fire, and walked the plains together. Yet now, each moment carried a deeper meaning. They had faced uncertainty, learned to trust, and embraced the complexities of one another's lives. And in doing so, they had discovered a love that was patient, kind, and resilient, a love that transformed not only their world, but their understanding of themselves. As the seasons changed, John knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but he no longer feared them. With Eleanor by his side, he understood that companionship and trust could overcome loneliness, mystery, and even fear. They had built something rare and enduring, a shared life that was real, meaningful, and deeply fulfilling. The plains remained wide, the nights long, and the wind ever present. But the house on the ranch was no longer empty. It was alive with laughter, conversation, care, and understanding. John and Eleanor had found more than companionship. They had found a home in one another, a bond that promised warmth, trust, and hope for the days, months, and years to come. And so, the lonely rancher and the woman who had promised him warmth every night learned that life's greatest gifts are often the simplest: presence, understanding, and the courage to face the unknown together. The ranch was no longer just a place of work, it had become a sanctuary of trust, healing, and enduring companionship.